Good evening. My name is Mike Haynie. I'm filling in for Marsha Jews this evening, and welcome to We Keep It Moving by Marsha Jews. And I got to tell you, it is just a great honor and a privilege to be sitting in for Marsha Jews. Marsha will be back with you all next week. Marsha does an awesome job of her network and running this show and having guests on this show. And so she asked me, Mike, would you mind sitting in for me as a guest host this evening? And it wasn't even a question, man. Marsha is someone that I've gotten to know over the course of the past several years. And let me tell you a Marsha Jews story, man. So I met Marsha Jews quite a few years ago in Greenbelt, Maryland. And Donnie Glover, who is the CEO of the Black USA News Network, which we both house our programs on. I've got a program every Sunday called 60 Minutes in Black America, and we'll talk about that program a little later. But Marsha, was moderating a panel I was on. And we all got a little bit of egos. I got a little ego. My ego's about this big. And so I was talking with the folks, and so all of a sudden this woman came up behind me and said, "Keep it moving, keep it moving." I'm like, what did you say? So I didn't say that to her, but I'm like, okay, keep it moving. So that has become my expression, keep it moving. And I guess I didn't know how to feel about that, but I think our feelings were hurt because she was like, man, you can't be talking all night. You got to keep it moving. And so, as I look at the rest of my life and I look at keeping things moving and keeping things consistent, I always hear that voice in the backdrop from Marsha Jews. Keep it moving, Mike. Keep it moving. So tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to keep it moving on education. Education in urban America. We're going to focus on the state of Maryland specifically. But, one thing we know when it comes to our demographics of people, Black people, education in urban cities, be it in Detroit, Alabama, Mississippi, Chicago, Detroit, New York, Boston is always a challenge, and why? So we have some great guests tonight. A couple of them are educators. Matter of fact, three of them are educators. One is an education advocate, as I am. But before we bring them on, man, what is going on in this world? I had a chance today. I don't know if you had a chance to look at the special proceedings today from the House and this madness about Donald Trump and what happened with the insurrection with the Capitol in 2021, January 6th, and this young lady, Cassidy Hutchinson, man, I hope they've got like 8 Secret Service agents around her because I'm sure there are a lot of people that aren't happy. Now, how does our president, according to her, now I just read or just heard where the Secret Service just an hour ago said they want to testify to what she said under oath. They want to come to the Capitol and testify to what she said under oath about Donald Trump putting his hands around the throat of a Secret Service agent. Are you kidding me? This young lady, this brave soul, damaging testimony, and she was in the room. Cassidy Hutchinson was the chief advisor for Congressman McCarthy when he was the chief of staff for Donald Trump. So, of course, she was privy to everything. And, of course, everyone spoke with her. But the testimony she gave today about Donald Trump telling the security people at the White House to take the metal detectors down, that the people that were protesting January 6th were not out to harm him, and that he didn't care whether they carried a gun or not. They weren't here to harm him, but they were here to harm someone. But for a president to have said this is criminal stuff that's going on here. This is criminal. Where is America? Where is America we know? And of course, today we're going to talk about where is America relative to education, because when you have some of the atrocities going on in this world as we see today, and let's not talk about Roe v. Wade, and let's not talk about Clarence Thomas statement regarding marriages of same sex, and other things that we as a people have learned to respect of each other. Whether I agree with you may not be relevant, but your ability as a human being to love who you want to love, I respect that. But we are going to see in this country an uprising and uprooting of things that we had begun to accept from each other as okay. However your God views how you live your life is on you. And I respect your ability to live that way, whether I agree with you or not. But today's hearing in Congress was unbelievable. And the spill out of that is something that I think that we're going to see. Matter of fact, this may be, so we have a couple of firsts coming up potentially. This may be the first that we ever see a president go to jail. Because if it is confirmed what this young lady said today and what we've heard leading up to this point, criminal, and criminals like Donald Trump, because they locked up quite a few of these insurrectionists. He's the instigator, the orchestrator, so why shouldn't he be in jail too? I can't believe, my jaws were dropped. Donald Trump, of all people, okay, orchestrating this insurrection. So, we'll see that first. So let's get on with the education aspect of this show today. And let's talk about education. I got to tell you, I've never done a 2-hour show. I'm like, oh my God, 2 hours, an hour is enough for me, particularly with attention deficit disorder, which is probably why I was only a C+ student in school, but I did learn how to read. Matter of fact, when I was in the 11th grade, I was at a 13th grade reading level. Have you ever heard of 13th grade? I think that's year one of college. And so we'll talk about today the atrocity of education in America and why our kids today are reading at over almost 50% of our kids today that are graduation rate from high school cannot read above the 4th grade level. Unbelievable. Are we failing them? Is the system failing them? Is their families failing them? What is the issue with our kids today? And whose responsibility is it? It's all of our responsibility. We can't point fingers any longer, but we have to fix something if we think that hope is the way. So what I want to bring in today, I want to bring in first Dr. Kacie McCollum. Dr. Kacie, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you, Mike?
Thank you so much for joining us today. And I want to read a bit about you because you have a stellar background. Dr. Kacie McCollum is a doctoral chair for the School of Advanced Studies and faculty member for the College of Humanities and Science at the University of Phoenix a couple of years ago. So that's past, but this is some of what you have done. She is the CEO of Shiny Bird Farms, and you got to explain Shiny Bird Farms to us, LLC, has a BA in political science from Benedict College in Columbia, South Carolina. Isn't that all-female college?
No, it's
not all-female?
No,
it's a H.
That's Bennett, and that's in North Carolina.
Ah, okay, I got you. So no, this is the HBCU. This is a HBCU, and we're going to talk about HBCUs and the relevance of HBCUs in public school education, as if there should be some correlation, but we'll talk about that in a bit. But you also hold a Master of Education's degree, and you got your doctorates in secondary teacher education or curriculum design instruction from the University of Mass in Amherst, Massachusetts?
Yes.
Wow. So education obviously was important to you, and I'm interested to hear how you were brought up on that front in terms of your parents, and if that was a foundation, and that's kind of what we're missing today. You also are and have launched as a co-founder a company called Humanity X, right?
Yes.
And Humanity X is Humanity X Technologies, right? And we want to hear about that. So we want to hear about Shiny Bird Farms, and we want to hear about Humanity X. So we're going to get to that point, but let's bring in someone else to complement you this evening, Michael Eugene Johnson. Michael, you tired, man?
It's been a day. I'm
No,
not tired.
man, it has been a life for you. When I asked that question about if you are tired, you have been an education advocate for so very long, right? Out there on the front lines dealing with kids, tremendous respect from kids, public school education, advocacy has been your thing. And is Michael Johnson as an educator and education activist who graduated, you went to Morgan State, right? And I know you did some time at University of Maryland as well, right?
I did some time at University of Maryland. That's a good line to use.
Well, I didn't mean it that way.
Yes,
But
no, I did.
the point
University
of
of
it is,
Maryland in
you did
19.
time at University of Maryland and you graduated from Morgan State, another HBCU, right?
Yes, sir. And I
Wow.
joked because I said if you knew how University of Maryland was in the 1970s, trust me, you were a black student, you were doing time there at the
Wow.
I
Wow.
remember my door got burnt up. There was these 2 hour thick doors they had in your dormitories, and you know, three of us know about that. Well, I had flyers all on my dorm at the Hagerstown dorm at University of Maryland. They set all of my flyers on fire.
So you were up there acting up, and that
Yeah,
was unacceptable to them. That's what it was, man. So when we
yeah.
talk about activists, and we talk about activists in the Stokely Carmichael, Malcolm X fashion, you know what I'm saying? And here you are, man. And I meant to say when I asked you if you're tired, and when you look at the state of education in our city, in our state, in our country, you know, can we afford to get tired where we are? When you were going to school, right, just a couple of years or so, a few years before Dr. Kacie, and Dr. Kacie, you mind if I call you Dr. Kacie and not Dr. McCollum? Because I might mess that up. Dr. Kacie, I get. Okay? So, Dr. Kacie, you guys were going to school, right? Right, HBCUs were predominant for blacks to go to school. Today, from 2018, I think we had 22% of our graduating seniors from high school going to college, wherever they went. It's up to about 40% now that attend 2 year or 4 year institutions. 40%, but we say education is the pathway and the way. And should it be HBCU or University of Maryland or whatever? And we're going to talk about that as well. But Mike, it says here, beyond the practical tasks, you say school boards are the way and are to set a vision for the community and the young people in the community, helping them achieve a world-class education that prepares them for life beyond high school. So let's start off with you, man. How can we prepare our young people for life beyond high school when they can't read beyond the fourth grade, man? What is going on in our public school system? And that's a big question for you. And we're going to take it in bites this evening. But what's going on in our public schools, man, in the United States? And let's focus particularly on Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Prince George's County, Dorchester County, which traditionally in this state are at the bottom three of 24 counties. All three of these counties are heavily populated with Black people. All three of these counties have the three highest per pupil spending, right, in the state, which leads us to wonder if it's a money issue. What's going on, Mike?
Well, first thing we have to ask people, how did we get here? I mean, we got to look at how we got here. when the three of us were attending school, and I know sometimes when I speak with younger groups, they may lean back and hoo-ha. But when we were in school, Baltimore City's public school system was in the top 10 in America. In America, not just in the state, in America. But then things happened, things changed. And one of the things that we don't do to bring it up to speed is that we're not acknowledging we have a problem. We're not acknowledging that things are messed up. We're expecting our young people. There's a saying that says, you know, when you mess up the children, you kill the adult. So if you constantly look at where we've been versus where we are, you've got to look at the 5 reasons I always suggest. One is acknowledge and addressing that we have a problem. Saying it. Hey, you know what? We got a problem. Making funding schools and the community a collective priority. You can't fix the schools and have a bad community. You've got to have a good community and the schools to go hand in hand. There's very few communities that have very good neighborhood schools that's got a lot of crime. That's just a fact. We've got to address the school to prison pipeline. We got to raise standards for not just the teachers, but we got to raise standards for the students and for the parents.
So, Mike, who are you defining as we? You said we have got to realize we have a problem. We as parents, we as advocates, we as the system. Who is the we that you're defining, and is everyone accountable for that?
It's the village, because at the end of the day, if the village is not accountable, then no wonder the children, those children that are running amok. And let's be clear, we've got to put classrooms running and the curriculum in the hands of the community and the community villages. What we've done is we've allowed outside entities to come within our children. Real quickly, I'm going to tell you this quick story. My mother used to tell me about the story of Dunbar and Douglas. She says that people would send their children from the South and certain sections of the Midwest to Baltimore City just to go to Dunbar and to Douglas High School because that's where they were educating Black children at. What we've done is we've let other people, many that don't look like us, to come into our systems and say, oh, those poor Negroes, this is what we need to do and fix them. I have spoken, and to make this quick, I have spoken in at least 17 different organizations since this campaign began. I have yet to speak in 17 appearances in front of an all-Black organization yet. Yet 92% of all of the children that attend the Baltimore City public school system, charter public or whatever, are African Americans. That's the problem. The problem
We're going to get back to your platform because we want people to know that you are this time actively seeking the ability to change. But Dr. Kacie, Mike referred to the village and you shook your head. Mm-hmm. The village. Does the village really care, you know, about education of Black people in our community? What does the village look like? Does it look like Donald Trump when the historically Black university presidents went to his Oval Office and came out there with hundreds of millions of dollars to filter where? Does it look like Federal Hill in Baltimore or Western Maryland? What does the village look like from your standpoint that may be responsible? And I don't want to say that you agree that the village is responsible for educating a child, but what does our village look like that should be responsible for educating children?
That's a lot to unpack, Mike, but I pretty much agree with Michael Johnson because it is a village, and the village is the community. It's the children, it's the parents, it's the teachers, it's the local government. It's everybody who is in the vicinity of that city, of that area, It's everyone. We're all responsible. We can't push it off to any one person, because that's why things are broken. They are absolutely 100% broken. And now we're going, oh, I wonder how this happened. But this has been breaking down historically since what, Brown versus Board of Education?
Wow. So you're saying to me that the worst thing that we did was desegregate schools. We should have kept them segregated?
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that we have to look at the ramifications of all the actions that we do, good and bad. For the good, we haven't looked at what happened because of it, and that there were going to be some things that continued to happen. So, for example, if you say that Black teachers cannot teach Black children less than 50 years ago, well, it's no wonder why you don't have Black teachers in the classroom today. I mean, that used to be our job. Teachers and preachers. That's what we did in the Black community 50 plus years ago. So if you take that away, okay, so what is the incentive for there to be Black teachers educating not that they don't want to, but think of the price of education today and whether you're going to invest into a career that is a calling that no one is supporting you or caring.
Was segregation of schools to the benefit of us as a community because of just what you said? Because if you go back to the 40s and 50s, probably when our parents were educated and they only could go to a couple of schools, right? Their graduation or matriculation rate, ability to go to HBCUs, reading rates were significantly higher than what they are now. Just like you look at public schools now across this country, only 7% of the educators in public schools today are Black. 7%. Only 2% are males, right? So obviously we had more Black teachers teach, and they were of the community. So does segregation help us? What is each of you? Each of your thoughts about that?
Well, my point is that segregation, there was no problem with integration if integration was going to be followed. What we didn't do is we didn't follow the integration. We just said, oh, we can go. Because there was a time when you always remember this, Black folk didn't move. It is white folk that moved away from us. We didn't move. When I moved on Park Heights in 1959, there were Black folks and Jews living side by side, or Black folk and white folk. They moved. So when they moved, they took the resources out of our communities. If they would have left and then left the resources, I'm good. I'm good with the resources there and they not being there. But then the idea was, so many times we say that integration was our problem. No, the practice of not following it. How was it being disseminated? What difference did it make that I went to Carl's Beach that Little Willie owned, or Little Willie Adams owned, or the beaches, whatever the beaches were? What difference was the Atlantic Ocean at the white beach than the Black beach? It was nothing. So what was done, our generations, 2 generations before us, is that they didn't follow the integration. They just accepted it. And that's what we're doing now. We're accepting them scores that you gave out about our children. We aren't doing anything about it. So I guess my answer is, I didn't have no problem with integration. I wanted to go to some of the schools and some of the stores and some of the activities. But I then didn't know that the bigger picture was, what was we getting out of this whole thing and how could we change the dynamics of what it was?
Pretty interesting you say that in 59 that, they moved out of your community, but in the 40s and the early 50s, when we were in our own communities because of redlining of communities, right? So we went to our own schools. There were nothing but Black people around. When you look at some of the traditional areas in this country, wherever you are, where Black people were only able to live there They were able to go to school there. We fought for integration, right? So, was that a good strategy? And we're going to ask, we got a
If I can,
attorney.
if I can, let me say this. When the integration of the schools, of the African American schools, when the things came, there were a lot of schools in this country that were in a toilet. Okay, people didn't have any floors, people didn't have any heat, people didn't have any lights, people didn't have any books. All of that came in at the same time. And not that they were learning, because that's where they was getting sharecroppers and other type of people were. All we were saying was, and we were lucky enough, because when people say about the greatest generation, I always push back, because I always feel we were the greatest of generation, because we got there to understand the computers and keep up. Because when I went to college, I came out of a Baltimore City public school. I'm sitting next to Gilman. I'm sitting next to McDonough. I'm sitting next to some of the top private schools out there. That's when I realized that it wasn't about the school, that it was about race, and race mattered.
Wow. I'm gonna respond to that, but I want Dr. Kacie to give her perspective on that question as well. Dr. Kacie, what do you think?
Well, as I was saying, I believe that this is all historical. Like Michael's right on it, with the whole desegregation of schools and the ability to travel to other neighborhoods didn't make it better. And we lost different resources. We didn't follow through. We didn't look at the whole big picture. And I think that that's a bigger problem, and why systemically we continue to fall into the same problems and they're not solved. You have to look at the big picture. And I think we're not doing that. And I think in order to make a difference and to change, you've got to look at your past. You have to understand the history in order to repair the future and to
Wow.
prepare for the future.
Wow.
Absolutely, 100%. You know, if you have 50 plus years of disrespect to a profession, teaching, being a teacher is not respected today. So to think about it not being
Who
respected,
doesn't respect it, Dr. Kacie? Who doesn't respect it?
the community, the cities, and uh, people who write the checks to the schools to give
How
to the
about the HBCUs like Coppin State, Elizabeth City, schools that were traditionally teaching colleges that provided, right, our communities with teachers, right? Coppin was a big teaching college, right, Morgan? Mike, and Morgan had a teaching or education department as well that gave out teaching certificates and degrees, right? And all of a sudden, the focuses became more mainstream, it seemed, because they wanted to be degreed in other aspects when the main focus and abilities of these HBCUs were to get teaching certificates or degrees to go in the community and teach. So is it us that isn't respecting it anymore?
I mean, for me, no. I think that when you looked up, and this goes back to what we said about integration, when you looked up and I just didn't have to be a teacher anymore, and you looked up and I just didn't have to be a bus driver anymore, and I just didn't have to be this anymore, I could be other things. Where I said we missed the mark is that someone should have been gatekeeping. Someone should have said, but wait a minute, in the interim, we still need male teachers in the school system. We still need this and that in the school system. What we allowed was outside pressure and outside entities to come into our communities to make decision what we needed. They never cared what we needed before. At one time in Baltimore City, they had two superintendents, one superintendent for the white folk and one superintendent for the colored folk. So they didn't really care. But what happened was, in spite of that, in spite of slavery being in the bowels, in spite of being slaves, in spite of running away, we still came out educated, forward thinking, and in some circumstances well off. What we didn't do is we didn't follow the map, where the map says we have to continue to educate our children. But there were things that were put in place, like certification. Certification was never in place when you and I was in school. You got a degree in teaching. and you taught. And so what then happened is, instead of the schools, and I find the HBCUs just as guilty, instead of the schools teaching the certification, we're teaching history. And I didn't say George Washington wasn't a good president. I'm just saying he had 300 slaves. But we have to be able to be really, really clear. We cannot assume that it is white folks' fault that we're not being educated. It's just that they're making the possibility of us not being educated on a very high level.
Well, it sounds like a bit of an oxymoron, whatever that is, and we're on the cusp of Carter G. Woodson's quote about the miseducation of the Negro, particularly relevant to what the instructional aspects were in the classroom, because you're saying now all of a sudden we don't have to be teachers and we don't have to be bus drivers anymore with our high school diplomas, but yet the teachers who were pointing in that direction and the bus drivers that were driving us there were the basis of a foundation of flourishing community. So now all of a sudden, maybe the strategy of us as a people has to be examined, changed, and disseminated to a point where, we say, hey, and take care of our own. I want to bring in, and I call him an education litigator. He is our Thurgood Marshall, right? And a fierce education advocate that understands the importance of what education is as it relates to him and his time. But Franklin, how you doing, man? Franklin Lee, attorney Franklin Lee, thank you so much for joining us this evening, man. How are you doing this evening? All you gotta do is talk, Franklin. We're in the courtroom now, baby.
What's the issue? What's the subject of the day?
You were in the room, you were watching. And I think the point is that, how did we get to this point? And the real point was, who argued the Board of Education versus Topeka?
Who argued the Board of Education?
Who was it? Thurgood Marshall that argued, for
of Education, Topeka, Kansas.
Yeah, who argued that case?
I'm not entirely sure.
It was Thurgood Marshall that argued that case.
Thurgood Marshall, I believe.
Yeah, Thurgood Marshall. Was that a mistake? Was that a mistake, us wanting to desegregate schools, and we would have been better off having a segregated school environment where we were supplying to our own? Because it seems as though education had a different meaning when we had to teach our own, and we had to make it something that was almost unattainable, because people thirst for it, whether they were in a barn, whether they were in a church.
I got news for you.
What's the news?
There are people of African descent all over the world that have not gone through segregation that have been highly and well educated. So that's a fallacy. It's a myth that segregation either means you're going to be inferiorly educated or superiorly educated. I can tell you that the first part of my life, I went to elementary school that was completely segregated. And some of the best teachers I had in my life were during that period of time. They were all Black teachers. My classes were 99.9% Black students. And that school had me reading on a 10th grade level when I came out of the 6th grade. It was a poor school financially because it was segregated. It had unequal resources, but the teachers were committed. I can also tell you that later in my life, I went to an integrated school, which was Northwestern, and several of us are alumni of that school. And I can tell you I got a superb education there with both Black teachers and white teachers. So the quality of education in my mind has nothing to do with whether you're in a segregated setting or an integrated setting. I believe that students and faculty benefit from being in the presence of one another and learning from one another. I think that's one of the problems in the world today, that we don't have cross-cultural understanding to the extent that we need in this world, and that makes for a world that doesn't work so well.
So is that
In
Franklin's
terms of the quality of
philosophy?
education, you can have a superior teacher, a superior curriculum, a superior method of teaching, and you can have students that are committed to learning, and you can have a wonderful result in either a segregated setting or an integrated setting. I don't think it's a necessary prerequisite that you have one or the other.
Franklin, you know, this is just my perspective. Let's get real in terms of, not that you aren't getting real, but let's talk about cultural influences and a good kumbaya moment. Is that where this country is today? Is it a, you know, every man and woman for himself, every demographic for itself? Does America really want the influences of mixed culture for anything anymore? I mean, institutional racism is a terminology that came about when they stopped being outward and forthright in their description of us. Does America
You have
want a
institutional,
cultural influence in education, or does it want more of a
you have
segregational
institutional
influence?
racism with segregated schools. You have institutional racism with integrated schools.
Mhm.
There's racism all throughout the world. But failure is not an option. We have to overcome that obstacle. However we find ourselves, and the public schools are largely resegregated at this point, that's not an excuse for us not to have superior education. And I
So,
think
Mike Johnson, for a minute here, you worked as Dr. Kacie did, directly with children, young people. In your perspective, and we want to get to your candidacy for the school board and understand why you're doing that. In your estimation, what do the kids see as the issue, or what do you see as the issue that the kids do not respond to? Simply picking up a book and reading at the 10th grade level in the 10th grade. Well, you know, is it the games, the video games, or the lack of books? I mean, what's the reason that kids feel they're not learning at a pace that they did in the 40s and the 30s in our community?
Well, first thing, if you catch a kid in high school and they can't read, then the problem is not the high school. The problem is the school before that. It's about pre-K. We have to have a pre-K reading programs. That's got to be universal. That's got to be from the time before a child hits the kindergarten. We have to have a massive education, a massive reading percentages in our school system. What we look at is we look at kids in high school. If the kid has made it to high school and is reading on a 4th and 5th grade level, it's not the high school. It's the middle school and elementary school. And what we're doing too much is that when we see, oh, the grades have been changed and this and that and this and that. Well, it's high school. It's the elementary and the preschool level. All parents. And my daddy was a 3rd grade educated man, but he read newspapers all day. And just him reading newspapers made me read newspapers, which I still do today. My mama, which was, 16-year-old out of high school, had 11 kids, went back to school in 1960 and was a valedictorian in the first integrated class at Sinai Hospital. That's just what it is. But what we don't have is we don't have the connection to the communities. All of us grew up in a community where you could at least walk to 2 libraries. Think about that now. Where you lived, you could walk to 2 libraries. How many libraries can a child walk to today in the neighborhood?
They've got one in their hands.
Well, my point being is that even the library, the social relationships, the connection to the community was part of the educational scheme. We all knew that one thing that our parents and the community would say, don't do that, boy or sister. That's the wrong thing to do. What we have done, and I'll say it until I beat the horse is dead, is like Franklin said, you can't be educating children when the community don't care if they're educated or not. Nobody cares about our children but us.
Amen to that. Amen to that.
So back to my point, and we're going to play a clip because we're going to get into the political aspect of it because, you're right from my perspective that we have no one to blame. And I think this is what you're saying. other than ourselves with the lack of education of our own young people in our communities. You know, we have no one else to blame. You mentioned your dad with a third grade education could read a 10th grade or 12th grade book. Isn't that what you said?
Absolutely.
Right? Because once you understand reading, reading is the basis of it all. So there's a problem when you have consistently 58% of kids in jurisdictions in this state of Maryland, as an example of what's happening around this country, over 50% of the graduates that get a diploma cannot read above the fourth grade level. There is a serious problem. Dr. Kacie.
Mike, you're going to continue to see that problem in ways we haven't even begun to explore. Due to the pandemic, I mean, I was teaching fourth grade earlier this past year, and the fourth graders were in pre-K reading. I was not in the state of Maryland. I was not in Baltimore City. However, I was in a impoverished area, and the kids were reading 2-3 levels below where they should be. They were
It's
not
the same wherever we are, whether we're in Baltimore
right. Absolutely.
or Los Angeles or Chicago, urban inner city is the same. Are you saying to me that fourth graders were, what does a pre-K read? Dr. Seuss? I mean, what is it that they couldn't read at the fourth grade level other than a pre-K reading? What is pre-K reading?
It's phonics. It's learning sight words. It's the most basic of basics. It's learning sounds that go with letters. You know, they were not reading sentences or counting numbers to 21. I mean, those are pre-K things to do. And so if you've got a child who's already in the fourth grade and is literally 4 grades behind, and next year is going to step into an adolescent age into the 5th grade and then 6, you're losing that child. Like, reading, when they said the little commercials that used to play in the Baltimore area about reading is fundamental, there was never a greater truth. Because if you can't read, you're not going anywhere. You can't even make decisions about yourself. You know, you cannot make good, critical thought, common sense things. You cannot bring them together without being able to read. So
Dr. Kacie, what do the kids say about this? I mean, I know you said fourth graders. Do the kids have a perspective on why they aren't interested or why they can't learn? Is it lead paint poisoning? What is it that prohibits a kid from doing this? Are their own parents in their own house not capable of reading? Is it not important? What's going on that you see and these kids are saying?
for some of it, it is parents not having an education as well. So that being transmitted from, you know, parent to child. I don't read, so my child doesn't read. I've had parents go, I didn't know my child didn't read, and they were in the 6th grade. Like, they didn't know. And I said, how do you not know? You know, do you spend that little time talking with, understanding what a child should know at that grade level? Like, where's the connectivity to talking with the teachers or learning how to support the child in the classroom? It's phenomenal. You wouldn't believe it. You would not believe it. And it's everybody's fault. I mean, we have to spend the extra time. We have to put the resources there. But it's going to be pretty scary if you think about it. If kids right now, today, are 4 years behind.
They're 4 years behind.
Think about the 4th grader who is 4 years behind in their learning, in their reading ability. So when we talk about pipelines to prison, we're driving the car there. We're just get on the bus, we'll just drive you there, because you can't you cannot make wiser choices if you're not able to read things. Like I was talking to my children, I said, you get a letter in the mail and it tells you to come to court. I understand what court is. You get a letter that says you were driving too fast, you got a ticket, and if you don't go to court, you're going to lose your license and we're going to arrest you. But they can't read it. So they don't know. So they don't go. They don't know the importance or the value of it. So then they get pulled over and put into jail. It starts an interesting cycle.
Wow. Let's talk about resources. You mentioned something about resources, allocating resources. And, we know that Michael Eugene Johnson, at this stage in his life, continues to advocate and feels compelled to be part of the political process. And we're going to play a couple clips in a minute from a couple of leading gubernatorial candidates, because all of them say, Mike and Franklin, that education is their highest priority. Yet for decades, in spite of the fact that they all say it's their highest priority, we continue to falter, particularly in Black majority jurisdictions, right? So Michael, as a candidate for a school board position, what's the number one thing on your platform, or what would you hit the ground running when you win to begin to change the dynamics of education, our urban public school system?
Recruiting an army of tutors and folks to come into our pre-Ks and our kindergartens to work with our children. You've got to get children excited about education. You can't get a child excited about education if they're 4 years behind in reading or 3 years behind in math. I mean, even though the whole country is behind, let's be clear. And we have to be I know we're speaking to our audience, but we have to be clear. In your larger white communities, those numbers aren't as great as well either. So we got to be a little careful when we just say just in urban, because there's a lot of places, trust me, that it's not that cool either. But we have to be able to say, I need help in the Baltimore City public school system. I need as many mentors and reading tutors I can get. And then and make sure that we have a continuing door open in these schools, not to close at 2:40 and to close at 2:45 and everybody runs out of the building. I mean, most of us remember when you could come by, you had night school. So we punish the parent that ain't learned. We're not even giving a parent an opportunity to do better. So when a child sees a parent doing something better, they do better. So my first day hitting the ground running is getting on my knees, pleading to everyone that we need mentors and tutors to begin converging on our schools like an army to go into those pre-Ks in kindergarten and start assisting our children.
Hey, so I told you I'm going to press you, right? Because to me, that's something that I told you I'm going to press you. I'm going to press you because, that doesn't seem as though it's not something that we can do today. But from a process standpoint, for instance, in Baltimore City Public Schools, we have the highest per capita highest student spending in the state, right? And somehow there's concern that all that money filters where it's supposed to go in the classroom. And maybe that's an issue, or maybe it's not, because to go out and beg and get on the knees and ask tutors is one thing. To be part of the process and hold the process and the administration accountable, okay, is another thing. And we want to know how you're going to hold the process accountable, or you just go along to get along and you're just another vote on the board. I mean, what are you going to do to change process?
First thing we have to look at the dynamics. The dynamics are 10 people are appointed by the mayor. 2 people will be elected. 2. So all of this an instant waving of a wand to fix the schools is an unrealistic charge for me. What is not unrealistic is allowing the community to recognize that we have a problem and to ask the community to bring itself forward. When you look at the dollars, and not to go too far offline, but when you look at the dollars, Most of your mentoring and your outside educational contracts are held by nonprofits or universities that don't look like you and me. So somewhere along the line, out of the 12 people, not 10 now, out of the 12 people that will be sitting down at the board, I will be listening, I will be asking questions, but I will be coming into the communities saying this is what we need to do. And if the community who has elected me feel that this is what we do, I think it's something that we can do instantly. I think the reason that we ain't done it instantly is because we haven't asked anybody. We ain't asked nobody for no help.
Interesting point. Franklin Lee, if you were elected to the school board, first of all, is it time for disruptors in our systemic processes? Disruptors. So let me define disruptors.
Me.
Someone, hey, that's what I'm looking to hear, man, because, you know, a 10-2, 10-0, 12-0 vote, and you have the same atrocious data and statistic year after year is not disruption of a process. But Franklin, question for you as a education proponent, advocate, public school, looking at what was successful for you and your brother and your family, do we need disruption at the systemic levels of education? And what does that look like to you, if you agree?
First of all, I have to agree wholeheartedly that you need disruption because the system that we have is dysfunctional and is failing miserably and has been for some time. So if you care about education, I don't know how you can support the status quo. You have to disrupt it. You have to change something radically. But I think we need to go back. We actually need to go back to the future.
But let me ask you before you go back to the future, what does one tangible disruptive action look like from a Franklin Lee on the school board with Michael Johnson? What would you do? Stand up on the desk, fire the superintendents? What does disruption look like to get people's attention to understand the gravity of the situation that we're in?
The real disruption is creating a successful model, replicating it, and screaming from the hilltops, this is what all of you should be doing. It's one thing to tear things down. It's quite something different to build something up that works. And at this stage of my life, I don't have a whole lot of years left, so I assume I need to focus more on building something up. If there are others that want to tear stuff down, they need to replace it with something that works. And so the first thing we need to do is to define what a successful education looks like. What are the missing elements? Is it $100 million to build a shiny new high school with bricks and mortar? Is that working? Is it that we just simply need to spend more dollars per student in some jurisdictions than others? Or do we need to reallocate our money in a way that gets results? And by results, I mean students that can think critically, they can read, they can write, they understand math, they are creative, and they are engaged for a lifetime of learning. They're curious about the world, and once you get them on the path to learning, they're going to stay on it. I think the key elements for that kind of a model are that you must have very talented teachers. And I don't care what it costs, because we can't afford to stay on the path that we're on. It's not sustainable. Not for the city of Baltimore, not for this country. We got a bunch of dumbing down going on in this country. We don't teach about civics. People don't know anything about their government, who their elected officials are, how to get things done, how to advocate for themselves when it comes to anything. They don't understand the rules of the game. They don't understand money. They can't manage their money. They don't know how to invest. In a capitalist society, you're going to fall further behind.
Let me give you a sample, Franklin, to me, just a sample from me in terms of disruption and a tangible example. For instance, if I was on the school board, I'd jump up and down and say that I'm not passing any budget until in the budget it's included that $3,000 per family will be given to a parent that attends every PTA meeting for their particular child, right? Because if we look at the grassroots aspect of education, Mike's third grade, dad reading level, but still, or third grade level of education, but he still attained a reading level, successful professional. Dr. Kacie talked about her multitude of degrees. Benedict, Amherst, worked at the University of Phoenix. Education's always been important. Same thing with your family. If we can't engage the families, and maybe it's a tangible dollar perspective because we don't know where the money's going now. So for me, the tangible thing would be that each family of a Baltimore City public school child would get a check for $3,000, maybe it's $5,000 if they attend 4 PTA meetings and engage their teacher on an annual basis. And maybe it's pie in the sky, but that's radical to me. So, and I'm looking for something radical, be it for Mike, who's actually running, or from you that is an advocate that gets, see, we have to, in my estimation, get people's attention with something. Blowing horn, fire bell going off in the building, gunshots, everybody ducks and runs. What gets the attention relative to education? So I want to continue to look at the system, and I want to play from a gubernatorial candidate that looks just like us. Matter of fact, Westmore, actually, I'm going to play one from Westmore, a snippet of his educational platform, as well as Peter Franchot. These are the two neck-to-neck gubernatorial candidates that say that education is the very top of their agenda because they realize, they say, that if the Black community, from an economic and citizens or civil perspective, is to change, and we are to change the trajectory, that education is the way. So let's hear from West. Let's hear what Westmore has to say.
Which I'd like to be the first platform of yours we talk about. I'd like to play this quick 45-second clip.
Right. And so when you have a situation, so let's take education, for example, and I'll just tell you, if we just 5,000 kids will graduate from high school every year in Baltimore. 5 people prepared for college career, they walk across the country. And even for the ones that move on to higher education, they're then having to take developmental coursework when they move on to college. The challenge of developmental coursework when you move on to higher education is this, is that it costs exactly the same, except for getting more credit. So your students will then take whole batteries of developmental coursework, pay the same amount, and at the end of the year, after using all their freshman tuition and using aid or whatever it is to get them freshman tuition, will then have 6 or 3 or no credits to their name. Chances are that student will never graduate from college because if nothing else, their financial aid will run out.
Wow. So, Mr. Moore, that's kind of post high school to a degree, although it's the preparation.
That's right.
So in Baltimore City, that you in the stats seem to be about 95% need remedial, right? 95% need remedial. There's a statistic in Baltimore City as an example, and this is in urban centers across America. So Baltimore is not unique to what you see in urban education centers across America, be it, Prince George's County, Dorchester here in the state, and we'll get to them later, but 95% need remedial. In Baltimore City, we have close to 58% of our graduating seniors, right? The ones that get a diploma that can't read above the 4th grade level, right? So there's an issue. So I want to hear about education as a platform of yours and how you see change and what do we get educationally in Prince George's, Baltimore City, Dorchester County, Maryland, if we get Westmore as governor as far as education.
Yeah, I mean, what we have right now, Haynie, is I mean, this is so functionally unfair. It's functionally unfair to our students. It's functionally unfair to our families, but also what we're even asking our educators to deal with is functionally unfair. mean, right now we still have schools in Baltimore where children, when it gets over 90 degrees, we have to stop school. And they're sending kids home because we do not have proper air conditioning. We have schools around the state where children cannot drink from the water fountains because of lead, even though we've known lead as a neurotoxin for over a century inside of this country. But we've just been amazingly colored and class coded in the way that we dealt with it, where we have a situation that children are being predestined to have an understanding of what it is that we hope that they will do, where we are literally products of our expectations. And the expectations that we're stating to our families are not high. And so when you think about what's going to happen in our administration, we are going to, and I'm proud of the fact, for example, that I worked on an initiative called the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, which was a groundbreaking piece of legislation that ensured that we were going to get fair and proper funding for our schools, for everything from 21st century schools to ensuring that every child is going to have access to free pre-K, every child in need, that we are going to create pipelines for educators of color inside of classrooms, because that does matter to our children, particularly in a situation where, according to the last census numbers, over 50% of all students in our public schools in our state are children of color. So we have to make sure we have educators that are actually reflecting that we are going to be a state that is going to invest in apprenticeship programs and trade programs and give students a proper pathway from an earlier age, that if they want to go on to become a carpenter or an iron worker or a pipe fitter or work in HVAC, that there's going to be pathways for their long-term economic success as well. But we have got to start moving and investing in education like we need.
So what do you guys think about Westmore? And Michael, you moderated a gubernatorial platform today, right, of gubernatorial candidates. What do you think about Westmore? What he said? He talked about more money. He talked about postgraduate from high school, even though 95% need remedial, right? Is this real?
Well, it's political. It's what all politicians say every year. I mean, I don't care who it is, and Westmore is my candidate. I've heard this story. I've heard this dance for the last 30 years.
Makes sense, yes or no, Mike?
Interesting.
Dr. Kacie?
Interesting, and I couldn't disagree. I mean, we hear the same stories over and over again, but where's the action? There's got to be the action. I can say that even from the time I was a graduate student, the same issues have been discussed, more than 20 plus years ago in my life about what should we do about these problems in urban environments.
So Franklin?
We know what they are.
Uh-huh.
We know what they are. The action has fallen short.
So believable or not believable, Dr. Kacie? Is this like pie in the sky and just rhetoric from the head or the heart that you saw just now?
I think it's the heart, but you still have to put the action in the heart.
He mentioned 50% of the students in this state are students of color or black students, but yet less than 7% of the educators are in creating a pipeline. But where's the quantifiable plan? Franklin, what do you think? Head or heart? Head or heart? What do you think about what Westmore, who is right now in a statistical deadlock with Peter Franchot, who we'll hear from later? And Westmore, by the way, viewers, would be only the third elected black governor in this country in 246 years. 246 years, we've had 3 elected black governors, and here one that says, and he has a 15-page white paper on education on his site. And where are the tangibles? Franklin, what do you think? Head or heart? You believe it?
Well, on the positive note, the only thing that he said that I think has value is the pre-K for everyone. at least if we could stop the bleeding there, people won't be falling behind in school from day one, which is what's happening now. All that other stuff, I don't know that it's going to have a real impact, quite frankly. 21st century schools, what does that mean? You spend $100 million on a high school, a single high school building, when it costs $60 million to build Camden Yards Stadium. Does that really impact? Well, I understand the problem with schools, with students being in rooms that are 90 degrees and they can't learn. But that's a problem that's easily fixable with far less money than we're already giving per pupil. You could put a chiller in every classroom and take care of that. How much could that cost? I'm more concerned about.
And you think about these schools that they want to put air conditioning in. You think about these schools that they want to put air conditioning in. There were people getting educated when they didn't have air conditioning in them, right? At a higher rate than what's happening now. And maybe the dynamics have changed. You know what I'm saying? So, what's really important here?
Yeah, the emphasis is all wrong. You've got to look at where the rubber meets the road. Where does learning take place? What does it take to get better learning on the part of students, a better educational experience from the student's perspective? And I think it involves a lot of different things, and I'm not hearing it amidst most of the candidates' their platforms, quite frankly. I'm not hearing about the need to have experiential learning where students get to go on field trips and be exposed to things they wouldn't be exposed to otherwise, to ignite the fire of curiosity so that they want to learn about something and then build on that. I'm not hearing about how do we recruit the top most talented teachers and conveying subject matter to students.
Wow.
Whatever it takes to get them, we need to get them.
Wow. Franklin, I want to stop you right there on teachers because Wes said something about teachers. And the data says that there are 7% African-American teachers in this country, 2% are males. And one of that 2% we have in the studio today, Sean Woodland, phenomenal guy. We're going to bring him in a second because what I'd like to do for these last 50 minutes, and time is like moving, is begin to focus on the fixes and look at what we do. I mentioned that I would radically give parents $5,000 to attend 4 PTA meetings because I think the engagement and knowing that their children have teachers and seeing them, maybe that helps and maybe it doesn't. It beats throwing money away and doing anything. And I also believe that our HBCUs, of which Dr. Kacie went, yeah. I went to one and Mike went, yeah. I did time at University of Maryland, but I did my degree at Morgan State. What role do they have to pair and partner up? And does the resources that they get federally from the state, should it be tied into their ability to influence public school education? Meaning not adopt a school, mandate that you take a school. And to that point, Mike, of the tutors, maybe this is where they come from. I don't know. But let's bring Sean Woodland into the stream. Sean, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How you doing? Can you hear me?
Sean, meet Dr. Kacie, meet Michael Eugene Johnson, meet Franklin Lee, attorney Franklin Lee. Sean is a awesome young man. And what I'd like to do is let's introduce Sean. Sean, I know you're going to be a little bit embarrassed, and we're going to talk about it before, but I'm going to play a little bit about Sean, man. Sean is unbelievable.
Oh, wow.
A string of brutality cases.
Claim misconduct. Those settlements did not admit to any fault on the part of the officers.
But cash settlements, nonetheless.
Would you risk your freedom for trying to make an arrest if you knew a prosecutor might come behind you with an indictment for false arrest?
If the arrest is legitimate.
You're talking about probable cause. Ms. Steele, the courts themselves keep changing their mind, charging them criminally.
Any Baltimore cop doesn't want to risk using his handcuffs after seeing all that. Can you blame him? We responded to several calls at Brittany Walsh's apartment before she went missing.
Domestic abuse calls?
Domestic disturbances?
She was dating Craig Osterholm. Was he abusing her?
She say he was, then she say he was.
The reason that I felt compelled to show that, Sean, because it's a power of example. First of all, you're a great human being. You also are a teacher at a inner city school, even though it's a private school. And as a black male, you're one of 2% in this country, right? You're also a football coach, right? You coach football, right?
Yes. Yes.
And you also are an esteemed actor. Matter of fact, it's that docu-series that was called "We Own This City" that you were just in, right? A piece there. And so, I asked you to come on here as one of 2% in this country. 2% black males. It says statistically that when our kids see a black teacher by the third grade, that 15% or better are likely to enroll in college, right? 15% or better are likely to enroll in college. Sean, from your perspective, well, let's talk about you as a black male educator. What's that experience like in the classroom, man? I know it may be different at St. Francis Academy where you are from Harlem Park Junior High School in the inner city, but what's that experience like, man?
It's pretty similar. You deal with a lot. You don't know with backgrounds. A lot of the kids have a lot of stuff going on, and I feel like a lot of the time I'm trying to correct poor education habits. Teaching kids how to take notes and stuff that they should already have in place by the time they get to high school. So that's the difficulty I find in it for the most part. Just I wish you wish you could rewind time and have the kids get better access or better things going on earlier, but it doesn't happen that way all the time. So you gotta kind of combat that also while trying to teach at the same time. So that's the main difficulty I run into.
Why do you teach? Do you feel now that you're in the classroom that it's something that you owe, or is it just another way of life? Do you feel connected to teaching, and you feel compelled to do it because you're dealing with kids that look like you, man? What's your purpose in teaching?
Yeah, now it's evolved into that. Initially, I was just coaching football at the school, and the teacher had up and quit, so they needed assistant and replacement. But once I start to connect with the kids, and you want to see them win. It's kind of that's what it became for me. It became something that because I never set out to be a teacher. If you asked me when I was younger, I would have never thought I would have been teaching anyone at all. But as I started to do it, and you start to connect with the kids and want to see them succeed in life and have opportunities that other a lot of kids in the city seldom get. And yeah, like you were saying with the acting, we don't even have that many arts resources at our school. I would love to teach the kids more about what I do, but there's just not enough resources to go around for them to be exposed to things or various aspects of life that you'd like them to.
Wow. Well, as someone that's in the classroom, I want to get back to you a little bit later, but I want to start the conversation so we can begin to look at some fixes, right? Let's look at some positive opportunities to turn things around. For me, it's not money. For me, it's parental involvement. It's figuring out how we can get black teachers or teachers that look like us interacting with the classroom and the kids. It's to what Michael Johnson said about tutors that look like us, that take ownership and responsibility. But where do they come from? How do we incentivize them? Is it enough to preach and to hammer home, we need to do this? Or is it a tangible talent, time, treasure, equality that motivates people to do things? So I want to go to Dr. Kacie, who is a curriculum designer, has worked for a major public university that looks to recruit students. What do you think are the fixes to get parents involved and to get more black teachers in the pipeline? Forget teachers in general that don't necessarily look like the community, but to get black teachers involved to take hold and heed as Sean has done in his classroom.
Okay, so what I'm understanding you to say is that how would I attract the black teacher to the classroom?
Absolutely. And second question is, how do we get and engage parents?
Okay, the first question, I think it starts early on with apprenticeship programs, with seeing it as an option, as an opportunity. But I think through funding and support of people who do become teachers, going through and taking it to the next level, because you're supposed to, as an educator, go to the master's degree level. That's where they want teachers to end up. So that takes a hefty penny to get there. I think they have to recruit outside of the direct field of education and look at people who already have degrees, who are looking for career changes, and offering incentive packages to support those people making that transition, and then also giving them additional education to get there. So I think there's some simple, these aren't big or high hope dreams. They're doable things that can be done to attract us back into our profession, or into the profession if we weren't thinking that way at one point. And for getting parents involved, it's the teachers have to open the doors, the administration has to open the doors, and invite parents in to be a part of the school, help them receive educational classes so that they can feel a part and connect it back to their school where their child goes to school. Allow them to be in the classroom to support being student aides. Those are some of the things. Have parent, they do coffee talks. There's all sorts of stuff that brings the community into the school. And so we're kind of needing some community schooling happening.
Well, let me ask a question of Franklin. Franklin, to what Dr. Kacie said, she said that the criteria for teachers, masters, etc., are we at a crisis point when a high school diploma to teach a child how to read at the fifth grade level should be the minimal or the maximum criteria for certain teaching jobs? Pay them well to do that so that we have a different source and pull. Not that we don't want them going to school and maximizing their ability to interact with our students, but are we at a crisis point where the entry to the gate to teach our children that can't read at the fourth grade level is too high?
I think it's this may be somewhat radical, and I don't come out of the academic world of education as a profession, but I think the focus shouldn't be so much on degrees and credentials, but on effectiveness in teaching. It's two entirely different things. I personally been taught by Nobel Prize winners that couldn't hold a candle to some of the elementary school teachers that I had. They were just horrible in transmitting the knowledge that they had to others. I've also been taught by people who simply, they weren't trained as teachers, but just had a knack for just teaching well and engaging young minds to be curious and to want to learn more. And they would use maybe Socratic method of teaching. They learned somehow how to ask questions, to probe on whatever it is the student knew and build on that. So I would like to see an academy of highly effective teachers that then train other teachers what their techniques are for grasping and getting students to be really excited about learning and to transmit the knowledge to them. In the old days, we used to have some teachers that would just call, stand or deliver. That's not going to cut it nowadays. You got to stimulate the minds of these young folks so that they want to learn, and you have to have enough energy where you're attracting their attention and keeping it. But I think if you got folks that really have an interest in helping young people learn, and they come with some experience, some expertise, some war stories, some real life experience that they can share, along with the basics of what the foundation of what it is that they're teaching, that may be a good start. I also think we need to probably use technology early on to expose as many students as we can to highly talented teachers wherever they may be in the world, and maybe do some, virtual classrooms, but also to get the students maybe to go out into the world a little bit and realize there's something beyond the four walls of the classroom, and certainly something beyond the confines of their neighborhood where they grew up, that's very exciting and could captivate their imagination.
Wow. So, Michael Johnson, would you be amenable to incentivizing, or would you agree if the state passed a emergency legislation that with taking a competency test, that a person with a high school diploma could go into the classroom and teach in Baltimore City and Baltimore County, Dorchester County, Prince George's County? First criteria is black male, black female. Second criteria that they had a high school diploma. They passed a test that would at least make them so that they have basic knowledge of reading, writing, arithmetic to teach. Would you, so that we could infuse that pipeline of teachers that look like our students? Would you be amenable to some sort of shake them up sort of legislation to increase the pipeline?
Well, not that type of legislation. I mean, I can't even feel that that's even necessary. I think that what we haven't done in the school system is that we haven't asked for help. We have 8 HBCUs, or 8, let's say we have 8 universities and colleges in this state of Maryland. And I know it's more than that. So let's just say it's 12. 12 colleges and universities in the state of Maryland. When have we had all of the presidents in the room and asked that question? What do we
Donald Trump had him in the room when they asked for significant money.
And then we would ask the real question, and the real question would be, what is it that we need to be teaching our children, and for our children to get inside of your institution? And then we bring down all of the businesses that are also within the state of Maryland. And we say, what do we need to be teaching our children so that our children have an opportunity to work in your establishments? Once we've gotten the blueprints of what it is to move forward after we get out of high school, then we can come back into the classroom and say, this is the blueprint for the classroom, not pouring money into the school system for things that only last for a short amount of time or no time at all. But we keep forgetting that we're saying and suggesting the conditions of the school is because the school system is trying. No, the school system isn't trying. And the reason that the school system isn't trying, the majority of the people who are responsible for the children that look like me and you don't look like me and you. And if you don't love the children, it is nothing you can pour into the school system, nothing you can pour into the programs in the school system that's going to fix it. Until the school system admits it has a and then ask for the assistant. If it's standing on the table, flapping your wings, wearing a chicken suit at a board meeting, whatever it takes in order to say, we are in a crisis. Because let's be absolutely clear. Everyone in this room right now are future ancestors. Sooner or later, we will be ancestors. People will be talking about whatever it was we done. And I just don't feel that no one in this group here is going to be the type of person that wants the dirt thrown into their face and say they didn't do anything. But this particular school system, I'm talking about the public school system. If they look at what St. Francis has done, some of the great things that St. Francis continue to do when it comes to young people who have no homes, homeless children, or children that attend St. Francis that they put in dormitories, and even their athletic paralysis doesn't stop them, makes them move forward because they believe in the pride of education. And that's what we have to do to return our community back into the education fold.
Wow, that's powerful. Let's go to Sean. Sean, I wanted to ask you a question about recruitment of teachers that look like you and what it would take from your perspective. But what I'd like to go to is your education, right? Because I know you went to, you had a private school education, right? I think you went to Loyola or Gilman. Which one did you go to? You went to Gilman, right? And now you're teaching at St. Francis, although at St. Francis, as you mentioned, the kids model any other Black school in the city, right?
Right.
So what do you see as an opportunity to bring in more teachers? Do you think that the standards are too high in order to have more teachers in the pipeline? Do you think the HBCUs should have responsibility tied into their money? What do you see as the solution?
Yeah, I mean, I see the HBCUs definitely get involved, but this is what we had a end of year meeting, and what principal was discussing. It was like it's tough to recruit people because there's not a lot of money to go around, and the salary is tough for people to live off of. You know, he was saying it's particularly what I'm doing at St. Francis. They have a program where you can get a master's degree or some alternative degree at Loyola College for free while you're teaching there, and I'm taking advantage of that as well, and that's one of the benefits. But he says a lot of the teachers only stay there until that runs out, and then they go on to do bigger and better things or to try and make more money to sustain themselves. For me, luckily, I have other side things I do like acting and to get other income, but that's one of the big hurdles. We've had a lot of Black male teachers who've come and gone since I've been there, and that's I don't exactly know what the answer is, but it has to change in some way. But I really don't have an answer for you.
So what's the answer to stay? Is it a six-figure salary? Is it free education for yourself as well? And if that's the case where we can't recruit teachers because of that standard, is to what Dr. Kacie talked about in terms of a master's level as usual entrance criteria for a teacher, is that too high? Can someone with a high school diploma actually teach a ninth grade or 10th grade reading class in high school? I mean, particularly if the kids aren't reading at a fourth grade level, or there are other intricacies of teaching that I don't understand.
Yeah, it's definitely capable, but yeah, I see the master's degree aspect of it. That doesn't mean that you'll be able to relate to the kids or they'll listen to you. It's some nuance that you have to develop, because the kids nowadays will tune you out if they don't feel like you care or they can relate to you in some way, shape, or form. So for me, I use, like I said, when you showed my reel, I just used the my side interest to get the kids to know me better and to trust me, and that has helped a lot. But yeah, it's just a difficult situation. I mean, not six-figure salary is not the answer, but something more than 30,000, probably maybe 40 or 45 at least. But it's just tough to live off. Yeah, or even maybe a little more than that. But it's just tough to live off a teacher's salary alone. And when you education incentives could also help, but besides that, I'm not sure how we could get the right type of people involved, or what even a litmus test would be to see if you would be relatable to inner city children. If you were to be brought in, could you last? Because for myself, I found out I have to check my ego at the door, because the kids, they come from all different backgrounds and can be all over the place. You could be teaching a kid from a 2-parent household, or on the other hand, you could be teaching a kid who hasn't ate in 2 days. So you have to be cognizant of all that and kind of aware and deal with it on a case by case basis. So it's a tough job, I'd say, in the long run.
So what about your own education, Sean? So how did your education affect your ability to be? Because I view you as successful. You know what I'm saying? Successful. You're living probably your dream. You're working. How important was that private school education, comparatively speaking, to the environments of education of children now that may not have that opportunity?
Yeah, exactly.
Was that something that was
I grew up in a very bad neighborhood, like a couple blocks up from where Freddie Gray was killed. And I'd say it was exposure, but this is how I actually got to Gilman. I went to Matthew A. Henson over on the west side for kindergarten. And my kindergarten teacher pulled my mother aside. Maybe she saw some potential in me and said, "Take your son out of public school." She literally pulled my mother to the side and told her to do that. So we just went through all the brochures, and Gilman got out at 12 o'clock on Fridays. And I loved the idea of that. So I went and tested there and went there. But you're exposed to so many different people and cultures. And, you know, you have friends whose parents are doctors or lawyers. And that exposure alone, you know, even dinner table conversations, you know, like if you're invited over to a friend's house who's in finance or there's a doctor, even that conversation, that little bit of exposure is so key that kids who are around the neighborhood or go to school in the neighborhood and never leave the neighborhood never get to see. You know, a lot of my friends never get to see who aren't here today, you know, who aren't alive today, didn't get that opportunity or exposure. And, you know, it was very beneficial for me because it was like tough. I was like, when I came home to the neighborhood, I was the white boy from the private school, but then when I go to the private school, I'm the black kid from the rough side of town, you know. So it was that kind of line I had to walk.
Wow. Well, we're going to start with you before we get to our final part of building. We're gonna fictitiously build a model school. We're gonna build a school and see what this school looks like. We're winding down in time, but let's talk. We talked about the teacher aspect. We talked about mandating HBCUs and tying in funding of HBCUs to serve or to build, because we know Hopkins has a public school as a charter school that is very successful. I'm not sure. Does Morgan have one? Is anyone aware? Does Morgan have one?
Yeah, Morgan's real involved with the Montebello School.
Involved? What does that mean?
From the standpoint that a lot of their student teachers or their teachers are in the intern programs. I mean, I think all of the institutions, Coppin is now starting to move into Coppin Heights. You know that, Michael, at that school is now being addressed that way. I mean, I think that what we do, or I think that what I'm hearing.
You talking about Coppin Academy?
But what I think that what we do is that we are still putting the horse in behind the carriage. We've got to be able to start saying not what they're doing at Morgan and not what they're doing at the HBCUs, but at all of the universities. I mean, let's be clear. Johns Hopkins and University of Maryland get more grant money and more money to work in education and urban school systems than all of the HBCUs in Maryland put together. So let's not give them a pass because they're not HBCUs and insist upon the HBCUs.
Don't disagree, Michael, but the data shows that when we have teachers of color teaching students of color.
But they don't all have to come out of HBCUs.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying that they are, but as a foundation piece, we're missing something that only contributes 7% of black teachers in this country and 2% of male black teachers. There has to be a definitive foundational pipeline. And to the point of what you said earlier, we have to take on our own and understand what that means, that we own our own issues. You know, we own our own issues, particularly with the money. But what I want to spin into now, before we get to building what this model school looks like, is the parental aspect of it, because we know teachers and parents. I mentioned giving stipends to parents that participate in the school's education. Let's start with Sean. Let's go back to Sean and go around the horn. Sean, what does parent participation look like where you are and what you've seen as a school educator, and what do you feel we could do to motivate parents to be more involved in their education, because that might be part of the problem?
I honestly think that it would be a great incentive, because honestly, before COVID, when we did have parent-teacher conferences, the students who were having trouble, all the parents I really needed to see, I never saw, or, you know, they never came in, or I never heard anything from them, or I have to end up reaching out to them. So incentivizing the parents, it seems like a very good idea to get them more involved, because sometimes it can feel like babysitting. It's like, does anybody care? Even if I slack off on my job, would anybody even care, or would anybody even notice? And we definitely have to get parents more involved, and I think that is a possible way of solving that problem.
What do you think, Dr. Kacie? What do you think? What is that model that looks like from a PhD level educator such as yourself? What does that model look like in terms of parent engagement that is that's different? What's out of the box look like in that regard?
Well, what was not inside the box is just what has been said, is that parents aren't showing up from the parents that need to be there. So some sort of incentivization or more community engagement, more money towards things that matter to the parents that they can see as tangible. It's not always money. It is the ability to reach out and say, find a job. If I don't have a job, I'm out looking for a job. I'm not at my child's school. So having career opportunities for parents, supporting parents is sort of the way to build that model. And it's not some wild, crazy, out of the box thing. It's right there. It's in our reach. It's doable.
So what is homeschool? So during the pandemic, of course, many parents were forced to homeschool, even those that really send their kids to school because that's their babysitting service, right? Homeschooling in the Black community went up substantially during the course of the past couple of years, and parents have decided to keep their kids at home. Many of them said because of safety aspects of the school. Number two is that many of them felt as though their kids weren't getting educated properly in public schools. What does homeschooling look like as an option in your perspective as an educator?
If you're willing to do all that it takes to properly educate your child, then it can be done. But I don't think it's the option for every family to do, although all families have an option. What I saw a lot of was kids not showing up to class. If you're in a virtual environment and you don't log on, you don't show up, you don't do anything, there's got to be that push and pull for learning to happen. And it wasn't happening. And a lot of parents were not checking up on their children to see that they were doing what they needed to be doing. There were a few that did, and their children did well. So, I mean, I experienced where I had several years in the classroom during the pandemic in which kids were educated well and were doing well, whose parents did participate. They were doing better than the kids that the parents did not participate. So we know that it's there.
So Mike Johnson, you had a quote: "A good, tough education is question the GPS route to a better life, no matter what your better is." What did you mean by that statement?
I think that what we've done is that we have softened education. We have turned our education system into an average education system. That we have not pressed, and we do not press our children to learn more because we don't have a lot of resources. I think your original question, I know Franklin has an answer because he had his hand up, but I think your original question about the parents' involvement, or that the predictable consequences, or that the children usually embrace their family home and cultural activity. If no one in the community is going to school, or the schools aren't open, or things not going on in their families, then the children aren't going to embrace that in school. We can incentivize the community, but we've got to let the community and show the community how important education is. We've failed in even exploding the education opportunities in our schools for the benefit of saying, oh, The schools are cold or the schools are hot. We get that. We get that. But the schools are there to educate 40 hours a week. Sometimes, and I know the young man who's an instructor now see that. They see him more than they see their parents. We've got to incentivize the entire community to embrace the education for our children, or this same conversation we'll be having in the next 10 years.
Yeah, we had it 10 years ago. Franklin, what about you in terms of parental involvement? How do we engage parents to participate in the process if we believe, one, Black educators are absolutely a key, and now parental engagement? What's your horn blowing moment to make that happen?
Thank you, Mike. And I've got a couple of somewhat radical suggestions. And I think I love your heart, Mike, when you say you wanted to give $3,000 to every parent to just show up at 4 PTA meetings. But I caution you, you want to avoid the Marshawn Lynch syndrome, where they say, I'm showing up because I don't want to be fined, or I'm showing up because I want the $3,000. But they're not really engaged in their kids' educational progress. I think part of the problem may be that a lot of parents, because we've had dysfunctional schools for a few generations now, some of the parents of these kids may not place a high value on education. That's a very real possibility. And many of them may actually be dealing with their own demons when it comes to being intimidated by education. So we may need to have classes in our community schools for parents, parenting classes, but beyond that, helping them to get whatever education they didn't already get for career purposes or for job purposes. We may also need to incentivize them by providing daycare or boarding, just like we've got at these private schools now. Why can't we have dormitories in our public schools? If that's the kind of environment we need to have a more positive learning experience. And finally, I would say that when it comes to recruiting African-American teachers and being intentional about finding the most highly talented African-American teachers, I think that's important. Why don't we take a page out of the university's book and create endowments to fund chairs of highly effective teachers in our public schools? If we had $100 million to spend on a high school, what would that generate in terms of teacher endowment chairs at our public schools? If we just did away with one of those buildings, how much resources could we generate for highly effective teachers to want to teach in our public schools? And beyond that, what if we had a situation where our teachers in these schools could be superstars in their own fields? There's a guy by the name of Idris Sandhu, self-taught engineer, whose family, I believe, came from Kenya, who has done amazing things for Google, artificial intelligence, coding, dealing with some of the most forward fields in technology today. And you listen to that guy talk for just 10, 15 minutes, I think he would be an excellent teacher in any public school, even though he doesn't have the credentials. He may not even have any degrees in computer science, but the top companies out in the valley recognize his talent and will hire him to work on some of the leading technology that's going on in virtual reality today. So we need to be able to actively recruit the very best that are out there and have the financial resources to attract them to come to our public schools and to teach there. And I think the investment is worthwhile. There's no reason why, I think Hopkins may have several billions of dollars in endowment, If we just got a fraction of that, I wonder what we could do in terms of upgrading the teachers, particularly African American teachers that are willing to come and teach in our public schools.
Wow, that's powerful, Franklin. And I got to tell you, man, if a parent shows up and I gave them $3,000, they're engaged, right? So they're engaged. So to what extent they're engaged, that's a whole different ball game. But what I'd like to do is start building a model of a school, what it looks like, and I'd like to just go around table. We're down to the last 15 minutes, and so I'd like Dr. Kacie, from a curricular standpoint, what does curricula look like? Mike Johnson, what does regulatory look like? Sean, from activities and inside engagement, and Franklin from a physical aspect. So we're going to touch on that. But Dr. Kacie, kick us off as a curricula design specialist. What type of curricula for an inner city public school, charter school look like that engages young people in what you feel they need today? What does curricula look like? What kind of curricula would you design?
Okay, well, curriculum starts with looking at the standards that the state puts out and then taking those and bringing them into engaging ways using, different methodologies to bring the standards to life. So, for example, when you're in the classroom and you are talking about engaging curricula that teachers are teaching, it's the methods in which they teach, knowing technology, engaging students with technology. I taught for a school that was a Mac school, for example, or an Apple school, and we were trained by the Apple specialists how to engage students and teaching different lessons. So getting teachers to understand how to use technology in the classroom and getting students engaged that weren't normally be engaged, and doing projects that are centered around the world that they live in. I think is one of the most powerful pieces that you can bring to children is, what does their world look like? How can they express it? How can they learn from it? And how can they engage in that on a daily basis? Not just through technology, but the use of the arts. That's huge. Taking them through different design points of using the arts to be able to understand their world. How does dance, music, drawing, acting become a part of how they learn about the world? And those are the types of things that I think that are important, that we have scaled back from and that we have left behind. Some schools do not have any art program, do not have any sports, music. They have gotten rid of them. And so I think those are really important aspects of having a whole student-centered curricula.
Wow. So we're starting to build the foundation of that. Sean, let's go to you next, man. You said that they told your mama if she didn't take you out of that school, man, that whatever. So she put you into a private school. You went to a private school. Here you have an opportunity to design a school from the physical aspect: boarding, no boarding, athletics. What would be the amenities that you feel to reach the kids that you deal with in the classroom you need? And how do you protect them from that environment that you were protected from in the 21st century? What does your school look like from a tangible aspect to engage kids, man, other than curricula?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the boarding aspect because, like was said earlier, like if education isn't valued in the home, the child's not going to value it. And I would argue that to diversify the stimuli as much as possible. Like I said, their arts funding has been cut. There are tons of kids who have these interests and talents, but they're never exposed to them, and so they can't flourish in ways that they could possibly could if they were exposed to these things. So there would definitely be boarding, especially in instances where we know the parent does not value education, and just a very diverse landscape as far as the education curricula goes. Just the arts, music, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and all of that, everything encompassed into one would be my ideal. And yeah, definitely the boarding aspect, because if it's not going on at home, it's not the child is not going to value it as well.
Wow, that's powerful, man. So Franklin, from a standpoint of private-public partnerships, right? What does a private-public partnership relationship look like in this school? You know, what are some of the key ones? Federal government, JROTC. What is it that you see to ensure that this school is successful from a relationship standpoint? What do those relationships look like, and can you name tangibly a couple of them?
Sure, sure. It's really all of the above. Like you said, we're in crisis, and that means you got to bring every possible resource that you can get to bear to deal with this issue. Federal government, state, local government, private sector, and all of them have a role to play, even if it's helping to recruit teachers, highly skilled, talented teachers, building a campus that can maybe help prepare young folks that are going into JROTC to prepare them for the service academies where they can become leaders and learn about cultures around the world and those theaters where they're going to be operating, learn foreign languages, get exposed through internships, student exchanges, all of that. The campus itself, I would suggest, would ideally be located in a model community. It ought to be the center of the community where it's located. And I would like to see us go back to take a page out of James Rouse's book. Let's create model communities in Baltimore City, for example, where we're intentionally building high quality single family homes and townhomes and apartments. We're dealing with the public safety issue because we have community police that are dedicated to that community that will learn the students and the neighbors in that community from the time they arrive. Let's focus on cutting the tax rate to make it affordable. Baltimore City has a tax rate, property tax rate that's twice that of any other jurisdiction in the state. But if you build a model community in Baltimore City with excellent schools, the people will come from all around and move back into the city. The integration problem will take care of itself. There are people that are living in Baltimore County now that are very dissatisfied with the public schools in Baltimore County, but they can't afford to send them to Gilmer. It's like $30,000 a year tuition. And a lot of the private schools, McDonough, Garrison Forest, these various schools are very, very expensive. So we have an opportunity. It's a real challenge that we've got all these problems in Baltimore City, but it's a real opportunity that if we make education the center of the community, we put the resources there to make a campus that's beautiful, safe, and a great learning environment that provides superior education opportunities and learning experiences for the students. I think we can reverse all of these negative cycles and then make the city and the school system the way it should be, and self-sustaining in terms of the revenue that we're generating because we have developed children, families, and adults that are productive members of society.
So Franklin, so you name two partners that we know in the region or in the city that would have to be at the table, can't miss this opportunity to engage, has the resources, the credibility, two private institutions or organizations that you would say, hey man, got to go get them.
Private institutions.
Under Armour, Legg Mason, any of the
major corporations in this area, all of them, quite frankly, are yelling for workforce. They need workforce development in the worst way. Nurses, I'm on the board at the Greater Baltimore Medical Center. They're having a horrible time. All the hospitals are having a horrible time getting nurses. We're not really teaching biology or chemistry or a lot of the sciences that need to be taught the way they were when we were in school. So a lot of students never even get on the path. They don't get in the pipeline for that. I'm a lawyer. I probably would never become a lawyer if I wasn't exposed to drama at Northwestern High School. I got a chance to play Judge Danforth in The Scarlet Letter, and that kind of lit a little fire in me.
Judge who?
Judge Danforth.
Okay.
The
Okay.
Scarlet Letter. And that was just my English teacher in the 10th grade that put that on. That gave me that
Wow.
opportunity. And I was
Wow.
such an introvert, believe it or not, as a student. I was very quiet and reserved. And I couldn't come out of my shell until I learned that I could be on stage and people would either laugh or cry when they saw me. So those extracurricular activities are very, very vital. And I think the private corporations in the community, whether it could be Under Armour, it could be McCormick, it could be M&T Bank, if they help invest in student exchanges and internships, that's worth its weight in gold. It's really, really valuable.
So you feel as though there would be no issue getting partners. You feel as though there would be no issue getting a private-public partnership for what we have heard described from Sean, Dr. Kacie, from yourself, that we would have no issue with public-private partnerships.
I don't believe so, because what I'm hearing from major law firms, from hospitals, from construction companies that can't find skilled workers or managers. We've got a real workforce problem. The baby boomers are fading into the sunset very rapidly, and there's nobody behind them to knows how to get stuff done. We're not raising children to be critical thinkers and to solve problems. We're just not. And
Wow.
I think if you make the case to these corporations that you're going to have to outsource your whole company overseas because we
Wow.
just can't supply the workforce for you, I think they'll invest. I don't think they have a choice.
Well, I think the last piece of it, Mike, you're going to bring us home, to what you've heard so far. Here you are, part of the political administrative process. What do you think of this? Is this the type of model or prototype that we're looking for in the 21st century education? And from a liaison standpoint, as a politician, and all this is, prototype, and, we believe that you're going to be an elected official. How do you convince, sell this to the political process as something that is necessary amongst the demographics in an urban environment, inner city, private-public partnership, a curricular design as it is, a person such as Sean and his insight in terms of what's needed from an activity perspective, and also as a model of a Black educator. How are you going to sell, or do you think this is something that can be sold politically?
I would sell it first to the community first. I would sell it to the people who are going to be part of the change. What we've done too many times is that we start there with the politics.
Define community then. Define community.
Define the communities, the people that live in the neighborhood, the people that get up every morning and go to these sometimes no-end jobs and sometimes great government jobs. The people whose children live within striking distance of the schools. And the same time about the partnerships that you said, as I said early in the show, if we don't sit down with everybody and find out what they need, then we can't decide what we need to teach. What we're doing is that we're raising children, we're teaching, we're asking children to learn how to do things that we aren't even using anymore. When we say we got a 21st century school, but we don't have solar paneling on the school. We don't have no green programs inside the building. We have no way to tell that child at middle school, in middle school, you could train and start being an electrician. Would you rather have an electrician or HVAC person who has 4 years of school or 8 years of school? We've got to back up the needle a little bit. We've got to put trade schools and the middle schools and moving forward. But we've got to make sure that we let the community know that we're going to put it in. The reason it's going to be successful because all hands are going to be on deck. And if we don't have our hands on deck, this is moot. And what we've done too much in the past, and I know we're getting ready to go, but what we've done too much in the past is that we've asked other people instead of asking ourselves.
Wow, man, powerful. Well, listen, I'd like to thank each of you. It's been a powerful 2 hours, man, and we can go on, but I think what we have is the auspices of a educational facility. As to what Michael said, maybe community deserves feedback. But if it's the same community that you all told me ain't involved in their kids anyway, that the kids will benefit anyway, I don't know what we're asking them, but if we need to ask them, let's ask them. You know, because sometimes people, we have to take the kids and do what it is that we have to do for the kids, because there's a huge degree of irresponsibility out here that's happening now. And who's suffering? The kids are suffering. The communities are suffering because they're not coming out of the homes because they're scared of the kids.
But somebody is gaining. Remember that.
Someone is gaining.
Yep. Agreed.
Well, you know, we're going to continue this conversation at some point, but Sean, Franklin, Dr. Kacie, Michael, I can't tell you enough how grateful I am on behalf of Marcia Jews and the We Keep It Moving show on Tuesdays at 7, each and every Tuesday at 7 o'clock. I'd like to thank all of you for appearing today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, this is Mike Haynie on behalf of Marcia. Thank you for watching. Very compelling conversation today on education in the 21st century. And there's so much that we can do. And there are people that care and that are interested. We just have to take the bulls by the horn, and we have to get the right people involved in the political processes that begin to mandate and to look at what change is in the 21st century of educating our kids. Join Marcia next week at 7 p.m. on We Keep It Moving. Have a good evening.